And for the person that engaged in the infidelity, for the person that ruptured that relationship boundary and agreement, they're going to have to be patient and do their time, so to speak, because you are going to have feelings. You're going to have reactions. That's just simply what happens when you cheat on somebody. And they're going to need to try to manage their own reactions to your feelings, because if they want this to work, they have to be patient with you because they're the one that did something that hurt you. All right. Hello, friends. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me over the past couple weeks. I got the flu. You probably heard this if you listened to my last little update. And I totally lost my voice. You can hear it's still probably a little bit raspy. But man, this has never happened to me before. I've lost my voice temporarily from like going to a concert or something like that, but never have I lost it almost completely. Like I had to move appointments around. I kept losing my voice over again from having to talk too loud or too often for my work. And there were times when I was just like almost unable to produce any noise, which is not very helpful for my life. So I'm very glad to be on the other side of it. You know, my voice, as I said, is probably still a little bit raspy, but I have a voice. I'm not like losing it anymore. And that's good because I'm going to be giving a professional talk in just a few days here, followed by another professional talk a couple days after that. So yeah, I kind of need my voice. But thank you guys for being patient. Today I have a question and answer episode with two really interesting questions. If you guys have not sent in a question for the show, or if you have and you want to send in another one, please shoot me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com, or you can go to duffthepsych.com and just use the contact form there. That's also a great way to send in questions. I've been getting a little bit more recently, so thank you guys for that. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into it. So let's go ahead and get into the first question. First question reads, I will start with my question. Can anxiety be genetic, or can a person have bad nerves? My mom had anxiety. I started with severe panic attacks at age 17. There's always been some sort of anxiety in my entire life. It caused missed education opportunities when I was young, not to mention activities and events I shied away from. I just turned 65 and have generalized anxiety disorder. I'm nearly housebound again. The thought of leaving my tiny apartment for any reason is unbearable. I was on Xanax and clonazepam and had a job, so I functioned okay. My health provider took them away with no warning, replacing with Valium due to my age. It caused me to lose my job as the Valium did not work the same. I found a new provider who put the clonazepam way down, but I still have my Xanax for now. I've seen multiple therapists and read everything about anxiety I can get my hands on. I've also tried antidepressants and meds for anxiety, but no success. I'm all alone with no family and having suicidal thoughts. Where do I turn? So first off, thank you for the question. I appreciate you writing in, and I'm sorry that you've been having such a rough go of it. I can tell that you're sort of feeling at your wit's end with all of this. Let me start by answering one of the easier questions in what you wrote out. You asked if anxiety can be genetic, and the answer is yes, partially. There is definitely a genetic component, and anxiety disorders very often run in families. It's also very common for anxiety disorders to be present in the children of parents who have other mental health issues. So for example, let's say that you have a parent with a personality disorder, like say borderline personality disorder, or maybe, narcissistic personality disorder. Anxiety disorders in response to that are very common because of sort of the instability that you're raised with and the lack of predictability, where anxiety becomes a very functional thing. So that's also very common, but yes, anxiety disorders very much run in families. Some estimates put the heritability at 50%, meaning nearly half of the risk of developing an anxiety disorder can be attributed to genetics. And there are also studies that show identical twins are more likely to both have an anxiety disorder than fraternal twins, right? So that suggests that there is a genetic link because they're raised in the same environment. Situation is otherwise similar except for the amount of genes they share. So yeah, definitely there is a genetic link there. There are also a lot of other factors that relate to the development of anxiety and anxiety disorders. So we have, early life experiences, things that happen in your life, stressors that act as triggers to kick off anxiety, chronic stress, trauma, even physical health issues. These are all things that work with the genetics to cause the development of anxiety and anxiety disorders. Now, you've been dealing with significant anxiety for a long time. You mentioned having panic attacks at age 17. That's brutal because obviously panic is not comfortable and difficult to cope with at any time, any age. But at 17, that's such a formative time socially, and there are sometimes bigger ramifications for having panic attacks that set in around then. You described missed opportunities and shying away from activities and events. We've discussed this many times before, but avoidance is the fuel of anxiety. This is not to blame your past self at all, right? You had some serious challenges, you were young, and probably didn't have this kind of support that you should have had back then. But when you listen to your anxiety, when it tries to warn you that you shouldn't go to a sleepover or go out with your friends to a movie or something like that because you just feel like something bad might happen, you don't feel comfortable, you're essentially reinforcing your anxiety for keeping you safe. Your anxiety is there to keep your body safe. And when it false fires and makes you think that there's something dangerous when there isn't something dangerous, but you still listen to it, that makes it a stronger force in your life. That reinforces your anxiety and makes it more prevalent so that you can continue staying safe. And a lot of times that means making your circle, making your bubble smaller, much like you're experiencing right now, which we'll talk more about. One other thing aside from genetics that I wanted to point out in terms of, you asked about like bad nerves, the structure of your brain can actually change due to chronic anxiety. In particular, you can see increased reactivity, so more activity from stimulus, and increased volume, so actually bigger size in the amygdala, which is a little structure in your brain. It's like an almond-shaped structure in your limbic system that serves as sort of the kick start for anxiety. It's sort of the alarm system in your brain, and it kicks off anxiety reactions. So for people that have had chronic anxiety, people that have had long-term traumatic reactions like PTSD, if you do neuroimaging, you can literally see an increase in the volume of the amygdala, and that means that it is more likely to be triggered. So that actually does change. Anxiety can change your brain. All of this is to say that you have definitely had to play life with a stacked deck, which is super unfair to you. You've tried really hard, I can tell, given the treatments that you mentioned you've had, the stability that you had while you were working. All of this isn't for lack of you putting in effort and trying. So I want to make sure that I give you credit for that. You have tried really hard and you're continuing to try. So I want to give you credit. But let's dig into the question itself a bit more. You said that your doctor suddenly discontinued your sedative medications. So alprazolam, which is Xanax. Xanax is the brand name for that. And clonazepam, which is Klonopin. These medications are called benzodiazepines. So they're sedatives. And typically these are used for acute anxiety like panic attacks. They very, very quickly reduce the reactivity of your nervous system and help you calm down. Some people will also use them to help with sleep. And they're, again, meant for these acute situations where you're having a really significant elevation to bring you down quickly. They do also kind of impair you. They make you drowsy. Unless you're very, very tolerant to them, probably shouldn't be driving, things like that. Some providers do use them on a more frequent schedule for management of day-to-day anxiety, but that's less recommended and less common. Generally, it's preferred for somebody to not be taking benzodiazepines all the time, and instead use something like an SSRI, an SNRI, other medication that you take every day to help reduce the overall anxiety levels. Now, I do recognize you said you have taken various medications with no success. Totally valid. Everybody is different. But the likely reason that you were taken off of the benzos was due to their risks in older adults, which I'm very sorry to say at 65, now you sort of fall into that category in many systems. So benzodiazepines can cause memory issues, confusion, impaired coordination, and increased risk of falls in older adults. So from the medical standpoint, there are a lot of reasons to be wary of them, not to mention the potential of dependence, addiction, things of that sort. Now, diazepam, which is Valium, as you mentioned before, that's also a benzodiazepine, but it has a longer half-life, so it takes longer to take course, whereas with the Xanax, you can take it and it's like an instant effect. Valium is a little bit of a longer medication, and it's often used as a bridge medication when you're tapering off other benzodiazepines. So that's probably why your doctor introduced that at that time. Typically, medical doctors, they reference certain criteria that list medications that are suitable or inappropriate for people over 65. I forget the name of the scale. I want to say it's the Beers criteria. I could be wrong about that. But there are certain criteria where, you look at the medication and it gives you an idea of, should you be using this for people who are over 65? By that criteria, Klonopin and Xanax, they fall into a category that says they should be avoided unless there's a really compelling medical reason to continue and the person is closely monitored. I'd say an argument could be made for you that you fall into that exception where you were functioning fairly well with those medications. Now that they've been removed, or they were removed, you started struggling so much. So there's definitely an argument to be made there. But the fact that this change happened abruptly with what seems to be very little discussion, that part is totally bullshit. And this is something that should be discussed with you and treated with care. I can't imagine, just from the provider standpoint, of suddenly yanking somebody's lifeline, right? The medication that allows them to work, allows them to function, just yanking that suddenly without being very clear about why, explaining the process and working together on a plan to make that happen. That just is a no-brainer for me. So that brings me to another point of who is prescribing these meds. You mentioned that they were a provider, but that can mean any number of things. Are you getting these from a primary care? Are you getting these from a psychiatrist? You also mentioned that you switched providers. You said that you found a new provider who cut the clonazepam down, but still gave you the Xanax. I'm not sure what kind of provider that is, but it may be time, if you have not yet, to see a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor that focuses specifically on prescribing psychiatric medications and other interventions for psychological issues. They're much more specialized than a primary care doctor is going to be. And typically, I don't suggest people use their primary care for, psychiatric prescriptions, unless they're very simple, like you just need 10 milligrams of Lexapro or Prozac or something like that. Or if they're on a very, very stable regimen and the doctor's just writing the scripts and not really, worrying about changing them at all. It's just something that they've been on forever and they're continuing that. If you have been getting the medications from a psychiatrist, it's always valid to get a different opinion, to go see a new psychiatrist if you don't feel like you're getting the care that you should be getting. Sounds like maybe you're on the right track with this new one, whether it's psychiatrist or other type of doctor, but it's important. And I would agree that it's best to try to find a different medication strategy here to avoid falls, to avoid the development of issues like dementia. However, that doesn't mean that these medications can't be used at all for you. You're absolutely at the level of severity where it's valid to push back on your providers and say, look, I am not functioning well. I was functioning well. What we're doing is not working and I don't have quality of life. You have significant things like agoraphobia, where you're not able to really leave your apartment very much. And you have suicidal thoughts, which should be taken absolutely seriously. So you're, at a level where it's important and you do need to advocate for yourself a little bit. I know that's hard, and it sounds like you've done a bit of that already, but continue doing so, please. So the steps, like step one would be to be very clear with the provider you have right now that this isn't working. Your whole life has been upended by this change. Maybe you're a little bit more back on track, but you need to go a little bit further to make things work so you can achieve that stability again. If you don't feel like you're able to get the care that you need, you can find another doctor, specifically a psychiatrist. And if you get to the point where your suicidality is serious and you don't feel safe, there's hospitalization. That's always an option. And hospitalization doesn't always have to be the dramatic scenario involving what we call a 5150, where you're held against your will. You can voluntarily hospitalize yourself. You can go check yourself in, contact a psychiatric hospital, and admit yourself in order to get stabilized and get a higher level of care. Totally valid. And a lot of times when it's on your own terms like that, it actually ends up working out better because it's a more collaborative thing. You're not there held against your will, and you can, have more control and agency in the process. One note is you mentioned that you've read just about everything about anxiety, But I did want to offer that if you have not taken my online course yet, it's called Kick Anxiety's Ass, feel free to shoot me another email or message, and I'd be happy to enroll you for free, because in that course, we talk about panic attacks. We also talk about agoraphobia, and we talk about the process of doing exposure work, which a lot of doctors really suck at. So there's a lot of stuff in there that, if you haven't already gone through it, it might still be good for you, even if you've reviewed a lot of other resources. Now, for you, you may also have what we call treatment-resistant anxiety, which is when you may need to look outside the box because you don't really respond to the typical treatments for anxiety. So, for example, you said that you've seen therapists, but what kind of therapists? Not all therapists are created equal, and there are also many approaches for therapy that are specifically for anxiety. For example, you could look at EMDR, so eye movement desensitization reprocessing. This is generally for trauma, but it's very good for a lot of different anxiety disorders. So that's something that you could look into. There are also treatments like TMS, so transcranial magnetic stimulation, or ketamine therapy, which can be great adjuncts to other treatments that you might be getting. These are ones where you might be able to kind of punch through and get some relief that stabilizes you while you're also continuing your other courses of treatment. If you haven't yet, I think it's also very, very important for you to get a physical workup. In your research, I'm sure that you've, come across this already, but let's say that you have thyroid hormones that are really, really high. That can cause you to have severe physical symptoms of anxiety that are just really hard to cope with. So there could be physical drivers that are making it so that you have the breakthrough anxiety regardless of what other approaches you're using. You deserve to live. You deserve to feel less pain every day. I want to give you some encouragement before I wrap up my response here. I know it can feel like you've been struggling with this forever, so why would things change now? But in my work, I see a lot of older adults in my neuropsychology practice, and I've also had a lot of older adults in my therapy practice over the years. I've seen people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond that make drastic changes that they have never made before. And you would be surprised at how long you can exist while simply not getting the right care, and how much of a difference it makes to finally have somebody competent to work with you. That can go on forever. People are unfortunately sometimes just in this pattern where they're getting insufficient care for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And then suddenly they're able to actually work with somebody that treats them differently. And then those changes happen. So please push a little longer, advocate for yourself, find providers that are qualified to help you. And if you need a level of care that's higher for now, there's absolutely no shame in that. I believe in you. You got this. All right, so on to question 2. It reads, "Hi, Dr. Duff. Your podcast has helped me through so much, and I love and recommend it to everyone. My question is how to heal from infidelity and feeling inadequate because of it. My wife has been unfaithful in the past, emotionally and physically. We've agreed to try to work things out, but I feel like I cannot move past this. When we argue, all the hurt from these infidelities and the lies attached to them, etc., all come up and I go off the handle. I feel like I cannot regulate my system when we argue about the smallest things, and to me, all the anger from the past rushes to the front. Because of this, I feel like I'm pushing my partner away and not really contributing to the healing and development of the marriage. How can I work through this with myself so we can move forward with our marriage?" All right, so first off, thank you for the kind words about the show. I really appreciate that. And thank you for recommending it to others. That means a lot. Your question is a great one, and you're super brave for opening up about something so vulnerable here. Thank you for that. I think it's amazing that you're trying to work things out with your wife. A lot of people aren't willing to see how things could possibly be mended. So kudos to both of you for doing your best here and trying to see if this can work. That said, it can be so hard to cope with infidelity. A lot of people don't think of this, but it's often harder to deal with the emotional things, like the emotional affairs that might happen, even more sometimes than the physical ones, because these are the ones that can so easily make you feel like you aren't enough, that there was some reason for your partner to be stepping outside of your relationship agreement and to really take things personally. I'm super sorry that this happened, and I don't blame you for having a hard time. You didn't mention how long ago these things occurred, but time is a huge part of the healing process. If this has been less than a year, maybe even more, but certainly within a year, you definitely need to have some grace with yourself and try your best to have some patience. It's nearly impossible to not personalize infidelity. Like, how could you not? When you're talking about things that you expected to reserve for one another being shared and engaged in with somebody else, that can cut deep. And it's, as I said, very, very hard not to take that personally. Here's the thing though, very often breaches of trust and relationship boundaries like this are not based in some sort of displeasure in the other person. They certainly can be, don't get me wrong. There are situations where someone is just straight up dissatisfied, so they step out. That does happen. But it's often not like it is in the movies. People are complex, and often it's not malicious. It's a mistake for sure, but it's not necessarily a reflection on you. Even though it can be hard not to take it personally and convince yourself that you were somehow not good enough, there are so many reasons that this could have happened where it's not your fault and you really weren't even the hugest influence on it. The pattern that you described of having the past come up anytime an argument happens is extremely common in situations like this. There can even be a tendency to do it without infidelity, just sort of the idea that all of the ancestral history of whatever this argument is, even things that don't have anything to do with it, they just come up when anything is triggered. That can happen in relationships, but this for you just adds more fuel to the fire of what you're dealing with right now. You mentioned that it feels like you can't regulate yourself, and even small tiffs serve as triggers to bring up all the anger and sadness from the past. Whether this is capital T or lower T we're talking about, this is trauma. Your nervous system is reacting almost as if the old injury is happening all over again. So this is something that's worth paying attention to. I really appreciate the spirit of your question because you're trying to own your own side of it and trying to help contributing to the healing of the marriage. So let's try to think of some ways to support that. I said this at the beginning, but I think you need some time. The foundation of your relationship was cracked, and it takes time to rebuild that trust. This means taking things slow between you guys. You can't pretend like this never happened and just try to go right back to business as usual. Essentially, both of you guys need to figure out how you can feel safe and how you can build security again in the relationship. I think that couples therapy would be a massive help here, especially with somebody who specializes in recovery from infidelity. Even better if they have a background in working with anxiety or trauma. Not only would this give you both a neutral space to process things, but they probably have some direct, actionable advice to help you with these conversations so they don't spiral out of control, and things you can do to establish better trust and better boundaries in your relationship. On your side, you mentioned self-regulation, and that's something that you can definitely work on. Maybe it would help to think about this as a traumatic reaction that you're trying to get a little bit more control of. So this means that there are coping strategies that could be helpful and maybe even necessary. So for example, learning deep diaphragmatic breathing exercises, teaching your body how to engage your relaxation response, also grounding exercises. These are things that can be done and practiced on your own to reduce the physical impact of your anxiety. And it's a great tool to bring things down a few notches in the heat of the moment when you realize you're elevating and you feel like you're going to go off the handle. You can also work on catching yourself more in conversation and intentionally taking a pause or coming back to a conversation if you feel like you're being flooded by emotion. This is a boundary that you're totally allowed to have, and it's constructive. It's not avoidant. You're actually trying to help the conversation. So you could simply say something like, okay, hold on, pause. I need to take a step back. I'm feeling a ton of emotion right now. I'm feeling angry. It's hard for me to be constructive here. So please let me have some space. We'll try to come back to this tonight, but I need to deal with myself right now. Something like that is completely valid. And again, it's not avoidant. You can take that time to come down a few notches. Maybe you can write a few things down that you want to make sure that you address and, rein in the tendency to just bring in all of this stuff that you're angry about. Tease things apart and just have a better idea of what you want to talk about. You may also need to dedicate some time to processing what happened on your own. This can certainly be through individual therapy, but I would also say that journaling, any form, is a great tool here. Write about what happened, write about your fears and insecurities, write about how fucking pissed off you are at your partner, write about how you don't know if you can do this anymore, how you don't know if you'll ever not be angry anymore. Just write about all of it. Then do it again and again and again. It sounds like self-torture, but I promise you it's not. It's you facing it and teaching your body that no matter how much you think about it, no matter how much you expose yourself to the facts of what happened and how you feel, it is not happening to you over again. And you are okay. You are safe. So doing that can help bring down that overall level of reactivity. Doesn't mean that you don't still deserve to be angry about it. Doesn't mean that you aren't allowed to have emotion. But the uncontrolled emotion that you're feeling, that's not helpful for you. So this would be a nice step in the direction of just getting a little bit more control over that. But overall, this is a process. You can't just make the snap decision that, okay, we're going to make things work. And I don't think actually anybody can decide that they're going to work things out in a situation like this. The best you can do is try to work things out and see what happens, right? You don't get to say, oh, we're going to be fine now. You get to say, okay, I care about this. I care about you. I care about me. Let's see if this can work. But you guys are far from the end of the road here. In time, that trust can absolutely be rebuilt. The reasons, the motivations for the infidelity can be better understood if that's relevant. And the memory of what happened for you will become less sharp. Doesn't mean you're going to forget about it, but it's not going to be as immediate and as threatening, especially if there's more understanding on both sides. In some communities, in some ways of thought, there are very much all or nothing perspectives on infidelity that it's like, okay, once you step out, once something ruptures, it can never be repaired. That's the end of the relationship no matter what. It's time to move on. I don't believe that. And I've seen many examples where relationships are stronger than they ever were before following infidelity. To be clear, that's not because cheating or infidelity happened. That didn't strengthen the relationship. It's because on the tail end of that, a lot of effort was put into understanding each other, to moving through what happened, and for each person in terms of bettering themselves. So that can very much happen. And there are a lot of people who have successful relationships despite ruptures that may have occurred. So I wish you the absolute best. I hope that whatever happens, you're taking good care of yourself and your heart. And I really thank you for the question. And that's what I got for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being patient again with my voice. Hopefully next week it's even more clear and, unraspy, though I'm sure some of you like that. It's been great to get back and answer a few questions for you. Don't forget, you can send me an email to deaththepsych@gmail.com if you want to send a question in. Definitely check out my new book, which is up for pre-order, Bipolar Answers. Go pre-order it on Amazon. And if you have time, I would really, really appreciate you sharing or reviewing the show. It makes a big difference. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time.